very good morning to everyone, and I'm Karen. So I would like to thank SEAMEO for the platform and also the passionate teachers for attending to our awareness programs, and also to thank Dr. Ahmad for the great opportunity to share my findings today. So what are we going to talk about today? Seems familiar and unfamiliar too for many of us. So the mood and behavior in epilepsy. Okay. Okay, so what the research say is like the epilepsy is not equal to low IQ. This is what Dr. Sharini has shared yesterday. So we might think that the people with epilepsy, they might have difficulty in the intellectual, but not all of them, because most of them are in average IQ. And the epilepsy would give However, the epilepsy would give an impact on the cognitive and emotional functioning, as well as the more common one that we always hear is memory impairment, the attention and the executive functioning deficit, the language dysfunction, the learning disabilities, mood disorders, and some behavioral problems may start as well. So the research about the age and psychiatry in epilepsy found that actually attention deficit and hyperactive disorder, which we call ADHD, is actually quite common in children, and the depression predominance actually found more commonly in adolescents. And whereas the other research about the epilepsy and intellectual disability, sometimes we do think that like the children with epilepsy with lower IQ, they might not be going through some psychiatric disorder, but they do actually. So quite large amount of them at least have one psychiatric disorder. 27% of them at least have like the autism spectrum disorder, and 11% they might appear autistic-like condition. So the condition is that for us to know that sometimes the people with lower IQ, they might not be able to express as other children with average IQ, but they do go through some emotional and psychiatric issues as well. So let's zoom in a little bit on the mood. It is very familiar to us, isn't it? We all have our mood. So some feeling that we are having in this moment. And let's have a little bit of time checking in with ourselves today. And how are you feeling? How are you feeling today? Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant for you today? Or do you feel excited for the talk? Or do you feel bored or fatigued? Because sometimes you can be exciting to learn about a lot of things, and sometimes you can feel boring and also tired as well, isn't it? Because this course is going to last for like 3 to 4 hours. Or actually, do you also feel contented today? So I would say that I do feel very anxious and very nervous to have to present, and dealing with the IT complication, that I do feel very stressed, but at the same time, I do feel very happy and excited to share with our fellow passionate group of people in helping the epilepsy population. So thank you for coming today. So these are the mood words that commonly we would find, and in the pleasant, the unpleasant, and sometimes it's more activating and sometimes it's more deactivating. So a little bit of our focus today, perhaps in this unpleasant or the activation part, that we wanted to focus a little bit more for the population in epilepsy. So some associated words that we use for the moods is the feelings, the emotion, the affect, and the temper. So the feelings and emotion is quite common that we use. Affect is more to like how you look like when you feel some emotion. So when you feel anxious, that your face look very tense and constricted, or when you are happy, that your face look more relaxed. And the other one that we would use for the associated with mood is the temper, which is the part where we usually describe the temperament, isn't it? For the children, it's very common. Okay, so next one we will focus. Okay, so the mood in epilepsy. Wait a while. Okay, mood in epilepsy. That there are two reasons for the epilepsy to happen. There's a lot of factors, but we categorize into two reasons. Like one is the biological factor, and one would be the psychosocial factor, which is the psychological factor as well. On the biological factor, right? we have some organic biological causes itself. If you look at the brain part, that sometimes the biological issues that causes some mood problem to happen, such as like temporal lobe epilepsy is often associated with increased risk of depression and also anxiety. Sometimes it's the brain structure, but sometimes it's also about the medication itself. That the medication or anti-epileptic drugs, it will also causes changes in mood. So this is something that pass beyond what a person can actually control because it's more to biological concerns. And sometimes it is about the environment. If you look over there, down there. So sometimes when they have epilepsy itself, it's just not them getting sick, isn't it? It's about the people around them would also get affected. So how the response from the other people, especially like family or their friends, and how they see the epilepsy, it will also affect their feelings and also affect their social well-being as well, social emotional development. So for example, if the family see that the epilepsy is a burden, how would the child feel? And if the friends feel it is scary or maybe epilepsy could be contagious in their misunderstanding, and how would the child feel? And when they are having seizure, if we as teacher or the helper, we are panic and avoidant, and how would the child see themselves? These are the things that we wanted to question ourselves when we are helping with the children with the epilepsy as well. So therefore, it is important, or at least for us to understand, that there's a need to be sensitive of the child emotions too, as it is very helpful if we can be calm and composed when the seizure happens, and also to be checking in with their emotions. So how their social and emotional development been affected, if we can see that it will impacting them in the self-confidence, in the self-esteem because of how they see their self-worth is, and also it will impact in how they actually love themselves. Sometimes children can also be in denial about the sickness because there's a lot to go through and it's something that unfamiliar for them to happen as well. And I met an adolescent with like a denial stage when they're having epilepsy. He actually do a lot of things that against what doctor says. So doctor says you have to sleep early, and then he will sleep like really early, but early in the morning. And then when we say like the game would trigger the stress and the game would trigger more epilepsy to happen, and then he actually play the game until morning. So this is something that they are showing that they're trying their way to fight against the epilepsy. Like what if that when I sleep late and it doesn't happen to trigger my epilepsy, and what if it really worked? So in that denial stage, it can be quite reactive also for the children. And sometimes they will be keep living in fear, the fear of failure, the fear of like, I couldn't do this anymore, I couldn't do that anymore. People would not allow me to participate in the things that I used to like already. So that there is a lot of fear and also loss and the grief in the process, that sometimes they would be very afraid of having like sudden death. Although that is not very common, or it wouldn't happen to most of the people with epilepsy, but they do for the children or adolescent or the family at least to go through the fear that the sudden death might happen. So all of this fear or all of this sadness that they are going through, that actually for long term, it will causes the mental health to be affected. So the mental health issues like becoming sadness, becoming depressed, becoming anxious, when too much fear, when too much things to think about. So all these mental health issues that will come along together, that I will speak a bit more about how we can also identify the emotional issues later on in the later slides. Okay. So what are the factors that will be affecting the mood in epilepsy? Perhaps when we don't have to talk about epilepsy, but when we talk about ourselves, there's a lot of things that can affect our mood, isn't it? When you wake up in the morning and then you just feel like, oh, today is a tired day, and then your mood will be very low. And then we started to be a bit refused to go to work. This is very, very common. Or sometimes when you just want to do the bread on your spread, and then your fork or your knife just fall down, and you're just like, oh no, it's like small things like this would affect our mood as well. And what more for the people with epilepsy, and the things that are affecting them is a long term. Sometimes can be up to years, sometimes can be whole life. So part of the things that would affect their mood that we wanted to know about is they would be worrying about the seizure. The seizure sometimes is like the presentation of the seizure. Sometimes the seizure can happen like without alarm. So they might have just like in a sudden a slight time for aura, and then they have a tonic-clonic seizure. They fell down, and then they just like jerking, and then people were like, what happened to them? And then they get scared, and then people they would be just very worried about when is it gonna happen, because it's like a time bomb, and the time is not really for you to control, like when is it gonna happen anyway. So the reaction from others as well, it does affect them, how they think about themselves as well. So along the process of the diagnosis and the treatment, because the epilepsy can be quite complex, I believe that everybody is finding their best way to find out the reason. If there's a reason, then it'll be easier for the treatment to happen. But a lot of the epilepsy, they might not have a reason, especially for the children and adolescents as well. So going through the process of uncertainty, what actually happened to me? Why am I doing this? Because it is not a most of it is not the illness that they're born with. So it's something that they're going through like throughout their childhood, and suddenly they have an epilepsy. So the uncertainty, and they will also go through a lot of grief and loss. Especially this part is really hard, because like some adolescent, they usually, I have one adolescent that he liked to have badminton with the friend, with the family, and then now that he couldn't, because there was time that he gets so excited playing badminton, and he suddenly had the seizure. And then he get very sad, and then but he was still wanting to go through like how normal adolescent would go through. And then there was a time that he tried out again, and we talked to the parents. Maybe sometime he can have a little time on his own, that he can walk around like a school carnival. So they allow him to just walk around nearby, and then he actually fell down, and then have the jerking movement, and then people come around surrounding him, and then he gets sad again because of the grief. Like I couldn't do what I used to like anymore. There's a lot of loss that I'm going through, and it's really, really great thing that they're great pain for them. So along the diagnosis and treatment, it's not just about the child going through the uncertainty and the grief, but the family do, because the parents, the as well as the people around them, they have to adjust that this child is no longer, some of the parts is no longer as healthy as before, and then we need more care, we need more help to the child, and then there's a lot of things to adjust as well, medical appointment, extra assistance. So these are the things that they'll be going through for everybody. So part of it, next one will be like the lack of independence, because I used to do things on my own, and now some of the things I couldn't do on my own anymore. I have to have somebody accompany me. The safety concern, I maybe when the seizure is very frequent, sometimes they would drop in the toilet, and then teacher would have the friend to help them or accompany them to the toilet. So I couldn't even go to toilet. I need someone, that it sometimes can be quite hurtful in their feelings as well. So, and also the social and practical opportunities being limited. So I have some children that they're going through, one or two children that they're going through epilepsy or medical illness, that the school teacher, they get very afraid, or afraid of like what would happen to them. That is very normal, because we are concerned if what if they get danger, or what if they get injured, and what's going on, isn't it? How are we going to deal with it? So they get very concerned, and they always ask them to sit down, just sit down during the pendidikan jasmani time or the exercise time, but they don't get to participate anymore. So the time that they actually mix around with their friends also actually getting lesser and lesser. The next one is, what else affecting their mood is also the stress. The stress that we thought like we can't see it, but actually it's there. And they have to juggling between the school's expectation and the health condition. Sometimes, the school still have a target that you have to study, and they have to pass the test. And these are the things that they'll be going through as well. And their health conditions, sometimes they would have a bit like medical appointment, frequent medical appointment that they might lag behind in their study. So these are the things that we want to concern. And sometimes they have learning disability, learning difficulties, that they might not be able to understand things as taught as how it was before, especially when they are dealing with a lot of cognitive impairment, like the memory becomes shorter, the attention span becomes shorter, and also their language, they might not be able to comprehend as much as before anymore. Or sometimes they find it very hard to express themselves either. Okay, and the stress that adolescent stage has to go through. Normal adolescent, they already go through a lot of stress when they are in adolescent. Like when we were in our adolescent stage, isn't it? We were very confused, you know, who are we? What are we going to do? And then the things that my parents say, now that I learned that it is not, and I have my new thoughts, and my new thoughts, it seems to be like with the environment, it's not clicking. So people seem like not understand me. And for normal adolescent, we already been very confused, and what more adolescent with epilepsy, it will make it more challenging for them. Am I going to live with this forever? Are these going to affect my life in the future? How am I going to college? How's the life going to be? Go to work and turning into adult, how would it be then? So there's a lot of things that they are thinking about. And sometimes when the thinking and the stress become prolonged and chronic, and then it would induce as a depression, anxiety. Sometimes that the research does say that it increased risk for children and adolescents with epilepsy, particularly the teenage girl. It can happen at any age, but then it will increase risk for them comparing to the people without epilepsy. The people with epilepsy, the adolescent do have higher depression rate. Okay, and then also the stigma and bullying. Dr. Sharini has shared about yesterday that the feeling different sometimes. Yes, I'm different with my other peers, comparing to my other peers, and then I might be treated differently as well, because there are a few cases that I met in my hospital that they're actually facing bullying, and the bullying looks like very subtle. It's just like, oh, not helping you to take this when you have things to fall down, or I purposely take your pencil case and put it far away so that you have to walk there and take it. So it can be as small as this, and sometimes it can be an easy target to become the target of bully, because they look very different. And that is why important that for the friends or for the peers, the classmates, when they have little knowledge about what epilepsy, they would really have a lot of feeling about, oh, this person is different than us. And when people facing different people in a group, that it's very normal that we want to get away, or something that we wanted to do something, or sometimes it just happened. So when the bullying happened at the school, that, or the stigma, when they have a little knowledge about it, and they might also lead to the self-esteem concern in the children with epilepsy, and low confidence, and also developing some independence. Independence is more to like, I have children that told me I don't want to go to school anymore because people laughing at me, and then people just make jokes about my jerking. So it's very common as well. So then when they started refusing school, so they have to go to many places with their parents, and very hard for them to leave the family. So that would also causes independence in the future when they grow up. So this is how the depression look like. So I want to combine, like, because the children and adolescents, they're not very well articulating sometimes about the emotion or what they are going through. So they will show in the behavior instead. So these are the things that on the right side, what this look like in school. So these are the things that we want to target as well, that it may be telling you not as what we see. It's maybe telling you the characteristic of the depression, or maybe not just depression, sometimes emotional issues or cognitive issue will make them going through these characteristics as well. Sometimes when they have some physical and somatic complaints because of the mood very low, mood does causes our body to have reaction, like if you have presentation and you get very stressed and then you get stomach ache, if you ever felt that. So this is the somatic complaints. And what it look like at school. And then they'll say they will always feel sick, and then they started to absent in school, and then not participating in school as well. Sometimes they can be irritable, like the children, like a bit, then they get angry. And then they will isolate themselves with peers, and the problem with social skills, and then started to be defiant. What you tell them to do, they will just not do. You tell them to go to left, they will go to right. So that also telling that they are kind of irritable in a way. And difficulty concentrating in the tasks and activities. Sometimes it takes very long for them to do the work, or they might not be able to complete their work as well. This is part of the children showing their difficulties that needed more attention. Short-term memory or impairment, sometimes forgetting to complete the assignment, difficulty concentrating. If you look at the short-term memory and also the attention part, in attention, they can look very distractible, restless, they can be daydreaming, but sometimes it's not really that they wanted to daydream, but it's just because they are having difficulty to focus, and that's what they can do at that time. Okay, difficulties with planning, organizing, and then it's common that we had to complete work, missing deadlines. And then sometimes they will show you some facial expression or the body language indicating the sadness, and they will work really slowly. And then we started to think about why it's just a little thing, and then you take 1 hour to write. Yeah, it's not really that they wanted to do it slowly. Sometimes it's just they are sad. Right? And hypersensitivity, and they get like a very easy get hurt, and they would cry, they would get angry, even over small little thing. It's just like, oh, she took my pencil, and they would cry. and then sometimes we want to pay a bit more attention with that. Okay, and forgetfulness, I think it's a common. Sometimes I have children that the parents say they had the homework completed, they brought to school, and then they forget to hand in, and then don't know what happened, and then they bring it back again. Okay, so this can be common. So we wanted to help to prompt them if they're forgetting something. And separation anxiety from parents and caregivers. Sometimes they will be very scared to leave their parents, and they will cry. They will have like stomach ache and frequent absence, and eventually they might also started school refusing. So this one is another one is in adolescent. So we can see that adolescent is a little bit more complicated, because children, they can show, like when I said that I just cry and cry and cry. When I'm angry, I just throw and throw and throw. And then sometimes adolescent, they may present it in a different way, that when you see that they have a like decreased self-esteem or self-worth, they might say something that the self-deprecating comments like, oh, I'm not good, I think I'm dumb, I think people just don't like me, I think people just think that I'm weird, like a lot of things that are commenting themselves. And when we hear this, we want to pick up that they might actually see themselves very differently, and they're going through some sadness of how they see themselves as well. So mild irritability, then they might be defiant. When you ask them to do something, they purposely don't want to do, or become argumentative, and then everything also they want to have another statement for themselves. Yeah, so like to tell you that I have a thoughts too. Right, sometimes they can be quite frequent, they do that indicating some irritability. And also negative perception about the students' past and present, and pessimistic in comment. I don't think I can do it. I think people do it better. Or sometimes we have they might tell you the suicidal thoughts. Suicidal thoughts, it might not come very straightforward. Sometimes it can be very subtle. Like I wish that I've never been born. I wish that I can just leave the world. I wish that nobody could know me already. Right. Just nobody care already. So these are the perceptions that they can be showing. Peer rejection, sometimes it's just like, frequent change of friend. This friend not really suitable, that friend not really suitable, or they started to become isolating, lack of interest, involvement. Or sometimes they can see very presented in like non-compliant or sulking, that actually they are bored. We don't know, and then we wanted to ask as well. And impulsive and risky behavior, sometimes adolescents do that. Theft, sexual activity, alcohol, drug use, truancy. It's not just these are the activities not just for the adults. I think sometimes they do as well when they're having impulsive behavior. And also, if they have a very poor coping, it will result into substance abuse. Okay, so these are the things that we are looking at, is the factors affecting the behavior also in epilepsy. It's not just the mood affecting the behavior that you're presenting. Some other factors would also affecting the behavior, such as some anti-epileptic drugs, and then they might also causes hyperactivity. Before the medication has been started, they were just okay, cooperative, sitting still, and then now the medication started, it seems like climbing up and down, in and out, and then disturbing people, going around the school, wandering around, and then these are the things that we wanted to take notice about. Irritability, aggression, drowsiness, dizziness, memory problem concentrating, mood swings can also be affected by the anti-epileptic drug as well. So it is important. Sometimes it will be good for the teacher to take initiative to learn about their medication and also to learn about the side effects that they are going through, so that you have better understanding that we don't just punish them for punishing, isn't it? We understanding that, and then we wanted to help in a more constructive way. So sometimes seizure themselves can be misunderstood as challenging behavior, such as the absence seizure. Sometimes often mistaken as daydreaming. They look like, oh, I'm not doing anything. And then after a few seconds, then they're like, okay. And then after a few seconds, they might go absence again. So focal seizure, and sometimes people might see, oh, that person is so weird, and then the behavior is so strange. Or atonic seizure, sometimes we can think like, oh, like, why you keep dropping things, like why you so clumsy? So this can be also a presentation of their seizure. It is not, sometimes it's not just about the behavior. So how we can be helpful as teacher? So I think it's very important that we can build a working and collaborative relationship with the student. We want to show care. We want to show that when I'm sad, that somebody is there caring for me. Somebody would check in for me. Somebody do care about what I feel. And learning about their seizure, learning about the side effects of the drugs, and also to reassure them, especially sometime before or after the seizure, because that is a time that their mood is really affecting very much. And we wanted to communicate with the student's family. We wanted to learn about the progress of the treatment and also report the observation in school. Sometime before some medication started, and then they would have just quite okay behavior. After medication started, they'll be very, very different. And when we spotted the difference, we want to tell the parents, so that the parents can communicate also to the doctors that are attending to their case, so something can be done if it's related to the medication. And also to promote social interaction. Sometimes they can look very passive and also rejecting, but sometimes it's just because I feel very shy, and I feel like people don't want to friend with me, and I'm very passive about it. And teacher can be very playing important role for them to be involved in the social activity, to be involved them with the people who to the friends that can be helpful around them. And also to provide some additional assistance. Buddy system, I think this is very helpful, because I have one adolescent that they have buddy system, that the friend would help to brush the VNS, the magnet, the VNS, to help the epilepsy to soothe down. And these are very helpful, but this is actually the initiative done by the parent as well, and the teacher can also help them to pair with a buddy that can closely help them when they need it. And close guidance or extra classes, if this can be offered by the teacher. And sometimes they might miss the school because of the medical appointment, or it's because of the seizure. And sometimes when some of the seizure, they do need time to recover from their drowsiness or from their consciousness, and then they might miss out the classes. So we wanted to have some close guidance if we can. So provide an epilepsy and mental health awareness campaign to reduce the stigma. This one will be really, really helpful, and to also educate the children on how we can be helpful. Because sometimes that the bullying happens is because they don't know what they can do to be helpful. And these are the normal reaction that they just like, oh, the stigma, like he's weird, she's weird, why is she like that? And then is this contagious? Like I must go away from him. But if we have good epilepsy or mental health awareness program, and this would help a lot of the students to actually collaboratively give a supportive environment for them. And also avoid negative techniques. Sometimes we don't know what's going on, and then we might also give some punishment, or we respond with sarcasm. It will be less helpful. And also be consistent. But this is very important. It seems like we are doing a lot of things to help them already, isn't it? But also this is important to be consistent with the standard and disciplinary measure when the behavior is not due to epilepsy. I just want to truant the class because I just want to do that, because my friend asked me to. So it's not because I need to go for medical appointment. So when it's become to the behavior, we have to be very clear, and then this has to be get corrected as well. It's not like, oh, because you're epilepsy, you get to do everything. right? It's not very helpful for the long term and the character building. So helping them to thrive, I think this is also very important for their building self-esteem, because we need to readjust the goal. If the goal, like it's very hard for them to complete a lot of the homework today, so we want to shorten it to the achievable range. It's better than we just tell them, okay, no need to do, you can just go home and rest, but just let them do a little bit that they can do, so that they still feels like, oh, this is something that I can do despite I am having the epilepsy or the constraint that I'm going through. And last one, also to consult with the school counselor, the psychologist, and the attending specialist on what else that we can help with, or something that we identify. Okay. So we have come to an end, but before this, I know that it is not very limited to just for the teachers to have this page. I know teachers are very resourceful people. You all of you are very smart and very resourceful in the things, in the ways that you are helping the student with. So let's not be limited by what I can share, because it's just my what experience that I go through. And if you do have like resources or ways that you find helpful, do share around with the people around you as well. Okay. So just this little activity, but we might not be able to interact. I just want you to make a mental note think about a student with epilepsy at your school, and what are the factors that could impact their emotional well-being. And also things to consider is like, are they worrying about seizure, lack of independence, the diagnosis and treatment? Is that giving them any difficulties along the way that they're going through epilepsy, and the stress, the depression, anxiety, then stigma and bullying? Because we need to identify what's there going on, then only we can give the right help or the suitable help for them. Okay, and the next one is, okay. The next one will be like, think about a pupil with epilepsy in your school. Do they have any issues with the behavior? What are they portraying? Like, I don't want to do the homework. I'm just tired. I just cry and cry and cry every time I come to school. And if yes, so what the strategy that you could put into place to support them? Make a mental notes of your thoughts as well, and something to think about. So that is all for my presentation. And I think this is, I found this from the Pinterest, that along the way I was searching for materials, and I think this is very beautiful, that I have epilepsy, but I'm still me. I'm not different. I'm just having epilepsy, and it's okay. We can still do as much as we can as well. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Im Kailun, for the sharing. May I now invite the second speaker, Datuk Dr. Raihana Abdul Khalid, consultant neurologist from Assunta Hospital, to give the lecture session. She will share about epilepsy and adult life. Datuk Doctor, you may continue.
You can see the video, is it?
Hello.
Okay.
Can you all see me and hear me? Okay, good morning to all my friends from Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. I'm very happy to be here with a group of people I have the utmost respect for. My late grandfather and my father were also teachers, so this brings back good memories. School was very fun. So, but in the interest of time, I will ask the chairperson to go on to my pre-recorded lecture, because I was having a bit of a flu. But just before that, let me apologize for a small little slip on one of my slides. So before the cikgu marah and say I have to go back to school and learn geography. Yes, Kelantan is a state in the east coast of Malaysia and not in East Malaysia. Yeah? So maaf cikgu. Okay, Mr. Chairman, can we start the recording? Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to present this lecture to such an esteemed audience. I'm Dr. Raihana Abdul Khalid, and I'm an adult neurologist. This means I see patients who are above 12 years old once they have obtained their Malaysian IC. I will be talking about how these patients, those with epilepsy from childhood and also those who develop epilepsy for the first time in their adult life, cope with their illness. My talk will include aspects such as driving, sporting activities, education, whether they are able to go to college and continue their tertiary education, are they able to get insurance, and how about coping with everyday life? Can they marry? Can they have children? And what are the kinds of jobs or work that they are allowed or not allowed to do? Okay, when considering all these aspects then, who better to ask than people with epilepsy themselves? This is actually a very small scale study which I and my colleague Dr. Shanti carried out in the early 2000s amongst our patients attending our specialized epilepsy clinic, which was held on Monday evenings in Hospital Kuala Lumpur. We asked them several questions on their quality of life, which was based on a questionnaire by the British group. We had 375 patients, of which they were equally represented, 50% male, 50% female. Majority were Malay, and a smaller proportion were Chinese and Indian. They were quite young. Average age was 29 years, 30 years old, and most of them had a long duration of epilepsy, about 13 years in all. You would be surprised to see that actually 80% of them had attained secondary level of education or higher. The other 20% may have not had any education at all, or they may have gone up only up to primary school level. So the majority of them had actually seizures which were quite frequent, at least once a month. About 36% had seizures maybe about once per every few months, and 20% were seizure-free on medications. Almost half of the patients were employed or in full-time work, although this may be something not of their choice or below their qualifications. About 20% were full-time students, but you can see that the majority, or almost one-third, had no employment or were in sheltered workshops. Generally, we can see that epilepsy did contribute to a lot of problems in their life. Looking at careers and jobs, for example, more than half felt that having epilepsy affected their ability to obtain and keep a job. And some of this was probably contributed by drugs and the drug-induced side effects. Having epilepsy also affected their work, and they felt prejudiced and discriminated at work. They had also social problems. Having epilepsy affected their relationships with close friends. They had problems leading an active social life. They had fears of being alone, and almost half concealed the diagnosis from others. But not to my surprise, only about 30% said it affected their self-esteem. And this is from what I see, fortunately, in my daily interactions with my patients with epilepsy, is that they do have a very optimistic outlook on life, and they try their best despite the illness, despite the side effects they have with their medications. So it is up to us clinicians then to try to help them with all these other various aspects. Looking deeper into the study and doing a univariate analysis, we narrowed it down to one particular factor that was actually contributing to a poorer quality of life, and that was seizure control. Those with more frequent seizures were more likely to have no education or very low education. They tended to be unemployed or underemployed. They came mainly from the lower income groups. They had problems obtaining driving license or insurance, and they had problems leading an active social life. This underpins our responsibility as clinicians to do better for our own patients in terms of treating their condition and getting the seizures under control. What about the other side of the coin? What does the general public feel about people with epilepsy? This was another study which was done by Dr. Vimalan, Dr. Zabidi, and Prof. Siti Tan in Kota Baru, which is the capital city of a state in the East Malaysia, Kelantan. So they looked at the public awareness, attitudes, and understanding towards epilepsy amongst the general public. So the group of people that they interviewed were young. They were relatively young. They were 27 years old, average. And they managed to capture almost more than 800 people to do the study on. Almost 70% of them were well educated with secondary education or above, and 90% had actually high awareness of epilepsy. They knew of what was epilepsy, they knew about the condition, and more than half actually knew somebody who had epilepsy. So despite all this, you find that 80% would not have any problems with allowing their children to be friends with people with epilepsy. But when it comes to marriage, almost half will not allow their children to marry people with epilepsy. And even higher percentage, 60% thought people with epilepsy shouldn't have jobs like other people. So you can see that even a high awareness of epilepsy, a high level of education, being young, did not translate into understanding people with epilepsy, or did not stop them from having some prejudicial opinions about people with epilepsy. Coming to education, I'm very happy to say that our education ministry does not have any discriminatory policies or action against any people with epilepsy who wishes to pursue higher education. In fact, no specific disciplines are barred. You can go into law, you can go into engineering, you can go into technical, vocations, you can basically do anything that your heart desires. Any person who wishes to enroll in any institute of higher learning or Institute Pendidikan Tinggi Awam is required, like any other young person, to undergo a medical checkup and inform the authorities of their condition. And in fact, the IPTAs are mandated to facilitate any modifications to the environment or courses as necessary. So for example, if the person with epilepsy is also physically disabled and needs a wheelchair to move about, that ramp should be provided, and so on and so forth. When it comes to driving, this is a very thorny area. The general impression is that if you have seizures, you're very likely to go out there into your car or motorbike and cause a road traffic accident. But we all know that driving is a necessity, especially in a country where there is a lack of good public transport. So driving is a necessity for education, for work, for socialization. And we have to balance that between the danger of road traffic accidents in people with epilepsy. There has been a lot of studies or papers looking into this in a more objective way. And although the reports have been conflicting, the majority have actually been quite optimistic. For example, these two papers by Alan Krumholz and Pooja et al. Looked at people with epilepsy and motor vehicle accidents, and they found that road traffic accidents were 26 times more likely to occur with drivers with other medical conditions compared to drivers with epilepsy. For example, people on drugs, people with obstructive sleep apnea, heart conditions, and so on. Amongst the people with epilepsy themselves, if they got into an accident, it was found that only about 10% were due to having seizures at the wheel. The majority of the accidents were due to other causes, like driver errors or road conditions. One study estimated the percentage of fatal accidents caused by seizures was actually very low, less than 1% compared to 30% caused by alcohol. Regardless of those studies, in Malaysia, we are governed by our Akta Pengangkutan Jalan. This is the vehicle licensing division of the Road Transport Ministry. So under this section 30, 1987, the director can refuse an application for a license if the person who wants the license is found to have a condition or a disease that may endanger others. And in this context, the Kaedah 18, 1992 states that epilepsy is one such condition. So if somebody with epilepsy wants to apply for a motor license, for example, a car or a motorbike, it can be refused just based on the fact that he has epilepsy. If he obtains a license after he's had epilepsy, it can actually also be revoked under this section 30, 1987. So they're quite strict on this. What about the rest of the world? There's a paper that has looked at different countries with different rulings on epilepsy and driving. And you can see that there are countries which have permanent ban. So if you have epilepsy, you are banned from driving. This includes China, Taiwan, Singapore, Japan, Turkey, India, and Pakistan. Argentina has no specific laws. There are some countries which require you to be 12 months seizure-free on or off medication before your driver's license is given back to you. So that includes the UK, Brazil, Canada, Saudi Arabia, New Zealand. Countries requiring 24 months seizure freedom includes Denmark, Egypt, Italy, Sweden, and Malaysia. Australia has different rules depending on which state. At the end of the day, as doctors, when we have patients with epilepsy and they have a driver's license or they've just been newly diagnosed to have epilepsy, what is the advice that we can give them? So the Ministry of Health has produced this guideline under the medical examination standards for disabled driver's licensing, which includes epilepsy in one of the sections. And it is stated that driving may be allowed if the person is free of attacks, including night attacks, for at least 2 years with or without medication, after which a review should be done after 5 years. So he can hold a driver's license. Or the person has had only a single provoked seizure and the likelihood of getting more seizures is almost nil or very low. From a more practical standpoint, most of us doctors would advise the patient strongly not to drive for at least 1 year if he's been newly diagnosed to have epilepsy until he is well controlled on the drugs and he has no major side effects from the drugs. So we go according more to the UK guidelines. At the end of the day, it is still a discussion between the doctor and the patient, and we try and give them the best advice possible. So we do tell them that probably they would need to take public transport or carpool with others, or at least have someone with them when they're driving. And once 1 year has passed, then it should be safe for them to go back on the road. Okay, getting an insurance for a person with epilepsy is an even more difficult area to go into. This is because insurance companies are business entities. They have their own rules and regulations, and they will consider taking up a client depending on their own rating scale. So for example, a patient with epilepsy may have to have a full medical report from the doctors, depending, giving the type of epilepsy that she or he is having, the prognosis, which means is this epilepsy something which is more easily controlled or something which is complex and difficult. And based on all this, they may then decide to take up the person as a client with a normal premium, or most often what they will do is to decline, or they will load the premium up to be higher, or they may say we will take you as a client, but we will cover for everything else except your pre-existing epileptic condition. So this can be a bit of a problem. There are some patients who do get insurance, and there are some who lose the insurance once their epilepsy is known. As we all know, work and career plays a large part in our adult life. Similarly so for patients with epilepsy. In 2008, Malaysia passed the Persons with Disabilities Act. In 2010, it also acceded to the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So this actually prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in employment, including during recruitment in the course of employment. So this in a way gives a lot of rights to people with disabilities not to be discriminated upon when they're applying for a job, from staying in a job, from being fired in a job. However, is epilepsy a disability? Unfortunately, in Malaysia, a disability is considered only when you fulfill 4 conditions. A, if you are blind. B, if you have any hearing impairments. C, if you're physically disabled, for example, strokes, amputees, and so on. And lastly, if you're mentally disabled. So epilepsy does not come under a disability. If we compare that to other countries like United States of America, which has the DDA, or the Disability Discrimination Act, and the UK, which has the UK Disability Discrimination Act, it actually helps to protect someone with a medical condition in various aspects of their work scope. So for example, in the UK DDA, an employer may not exclude a disabled person from a pension scheme without justification. So the medical condition itself is not sufficient reason. It can be unlawful for employers with 15 or more staff to discriminate against current or prospective disabled employees because of a reason relating to the medical status. So you can use any other reason except the medical condition to discriminate the staff. Insurance companies also have undertaken to include disabled people in employers' liability insurance policies on the same terms as the non-disabled. And the Act also obliges employers to make reasonable adjustments to accommodate the disabled. For example, if the disabled person has got seizures, which are more common at night, they are then given shift work to work only in the daytime. If the work is dangerous, for example, working with children, they are then placed into another division. They're not allowed to work under dangerous situations, for example, high places and such similar situations. So this actually gives a lot of protection to people with disabilities, including epilepsy. Unfortunately, Malaysia does not consider epilepsy as a disability, so in a way, they are not covered legally by the Act. So if someone with epilepsy is in a job interview, should he or she inform the employer of the epilepsy? Well, I would always say that honesty is the best policy. But if their medical condition has no relevance on the job, for example, they're going to be in IT, they're going to be in sales, perhaps to be more practical is get the job first. And then you can then inform the employer after a certain amount of time has passed that you have this certain and certain condition, but it's all under control and no reason to doubt your capabilities. People with epilepsy can actually handle any kinds of jobs. However, there are certain occupations which are not allowed because this may endanger the public. And this includes being a pilot, whether you're a commercial pilot with AirAsia or MAS, or being in the military pilots. Certain divisions of being a railway staff, signalers, for example, jobs where you have to handle firearms, being in the armed forces, in the police, and jobs that involve driving heavy machinery, example, long distance lorry drivers, and certain sports like race car drivers, professional boxing, are not allowed for people with epilepsy because of the possibility of injuring themselves or injuring others. So this is just a picture to show various people who have succeeded in their various fields and they had epilepsy. So I'm sure some of you would know some of the pictures here. This is Danny Glover. He is an actor. This is Vincent van Gogh, who is famous for his sunflower picture. This is Prince. So those of my generation would probably remember him as a great musician. The newer generation might know this guy, Lil Wayne, who is a rapper. This was one of the president of the United States of America, Mr. Roosevelt. Florence Griffith Joyner was a great athlete and Olympian. And finally, this is Lewis Carroll. So Lewis Carroll was the one who wrote Alice in Wonderland. So you can see a diverse group of people with a diverse group of careers and occupations, and they have succeeded in their fields with epilepsy. So moving on to marriage and relationships, people with epilepsy, like other normal human beings, may also want to marry, they may also want to have a family, they may want to have children. However, unlike other human beings, having epilepsy puts additional burdens and barriers, and this would include the stigma of how people look at them when they, with carrying the stigma of having epilepsy, fear, for example, of having a seizure during courtship, that may prevent them from even forming a relationship in the first place. They may fear that, out on a date with their girlfriend or boyfriend and having a seizure in front of them for the first time in public. And also, if they do have a partner and they get married, will they pass on their epilepsy to their children and offspring? People with women with epilepsy, for example, face a whole big different load of problems with pregnancies, breastfeeding, contraceptives. And finally, if you have children, how are you going to bring up your children safely? And so these are all the questions that are going on in the minds of people having epilepsy, having to take medications, and having to face all these barriers. I think some of us may be quite shocked to know that there were laws in the United States of America up until 1956. There were 17 states which actually had a law that forbade people with epilepsy to get married. And the last state to actually repeal this law was only until about 40 years ago in 1980. There were also laws that says that, you can sterilize a person with epilepsy because they can pass it on. So they were sterilized based on eugenic grounds. And again, this law stood until 1956. In the UK, there was no such law banning marriage, but there was this Matrimonial Causes Act 1937, which says that your marriage can be annulled, which means it can be completely off the records and as if it never happened, if either party was at the time subject to repeated acts of insanity or epilepsy. This act says that if you are, have mental disorders or if you have epilepsy, then the law can annul your marriage and says that it never existed. In 1971, fortunately, the act was nullified, which means it was removed, and therefore epilepsy as a reason to divorce someone is not valid anymore. What about in Malaysia? Is there such a law against marriage? So in Malaysia, as we know, there is the two arms, the Sharia courts for the Muslims and the civil courts for the non-Muslims. So under the civil courts, under the Malaysia Law Reform Marriage and Divorce Act 1980, this says that a marriage can be voidable. That means it can be struck off record if at the time of the party, at the time of the marriage, either party exhibits a mental condition under the Mental Disorders Ordinance of such a kind or to such an extent to be unfit for marriage, which means that if the person has a mental disorder, that can be reason for grounds for divorce. So fortunately for Malaysia, epilepsy is not in that category. So epilepsy is, you can marry someone with epilepsy, no problem. I do not know much about Sharia law because it's very complex and it depends on each individual state, but having spoken to several lawyers with knowledge, I have been told that epilepsy is also not a barrier against marriage under Islamic laws. And it is also not an excuse for divorce under Islamic laws. So finally, the person with epilepsy has found their life partner, their ideal husband or wife, and they've got married, they've got children now. Some of the practical basic question is, how do you take care of your kids, right? So at the newborn level, there are advice that we do give them to protect the children in case the mother has epilepsy. Is that number one, don't bathe the baby alone. So if possible, during the pantang time or the postpartum, you can wait until your husband comes home, or you can have someone in the house, your mother or your mother-in-law, to help you to bathe the baby. Use a special tub on the floor. So this is to prevent, in case there is an unfortunate event like you have a seizure while you're bathing the baby. If the tub is on the floor, there's less likelihood of accidents happening. And feed and diaper the baby similarly on a low surface or on the floor. And never ever to take a child to bed with you. In case a seizure happens at night, there have been cases known when the baby has been smothered by the parent. So this is one practical advice: have the child sleep in their own bed or cot. So when the child's a bit older and you have to go out, you have to go for marketing and so on and so forth, use a wrist leash, which is like a little belt that you tie around the toddler's wrist that you hold on to yours, so that in case a seizure happens, the toddler is not going to walk off and get lost. And finally, with older children, what you can do is to tell them about epilepsy so that they do not have any fears when it happens in front of them. Tell them what to do, what emergency numbers to contact, and prepare them for to help if any events should happen. Okay, moving on from the more serious aspects of work and insurance and driving and marriage and so on and so forth, people with epilepsy are also interested in having hobbies and joining into sports and activities. So some of the low risk activities which they are encouraged to take up would include things like daily gentle exercises, dancing, bowling, badminton, high jump. They can go football, they can have long jumps, they can go hiking, they can take up golf, ping pong, and running. Those are pretty low impact, low risk kind of activities, which should not be a problem for people with epilepsy to take up. Some of the ones which has a little bit more risk associated with it would include water-based activities. So this would be canoeing, fishing, hunting, sailing, water skiing, and swimming. So for this kind of activities, we would advise them to have someone around to supervise and also be with them when they are carrying out all these activities. They can also take up horse riding if they like, skateboarding, rugby, bicycling, but they're advised to have a helmet and protective devices, just like any other people when they go out and enjoy this sports. There are, however, some activities which are considered high risk, and someone with epilepsy would be strongly advised against taking this up unless they have had no seizures and not needing any medications for 5 years. So this would include boxing because it is harmful for your brain. It includes mountain climbing and also parachuting. These are considered, high risk, and you may have heard of one particular case where a person with epilepsy actually had a seizure in midair, but fortunately the instructor was well trained and managed to get close to him and stabilize him and brought him down safely. But this wouldn't be something you would recommend. Finally, the last aspect that I will be touching upon is advising the person with epilepsy on avoiding injuries in their day-to-day activities, especially in their homes. So, of course, practical advice and common sense would prevail. I will be talking of a person living in a normal apartment or a condo in the city center, but we can always adjust the advice according to their living situations. For example, whether they're living in a kampong house or whether they're living in a bungalow, all this advice can be adjusted and accommodated. So, for example, the toilet is one of the places where most seizures happen. So, some of the advice are as below. We would try to advise them to keep the bathroom as dry as possible, which can be difficult in an Asian context because, we do love our showers and our wet bathrooms. But a dry bathroom is probably less accident prone than a wet one. We would advise to keep the bathroom door, to have the bathroom door installed, which can be opened outwards. So in case they have a seizure, it is easy for people to open the door from outside and come in to assist them, rather than they're behind the door and they can, you can get stuck there. It is better to keep the door unlocked in case of accidents. They can always put a sign outside to say that the bathroom is occupied. And a shower is always a lot safer than a bathtub. There have been drowning cases happening when a person has a seizure whilst in the bathtub. So this bathtub has got to go. Okay. And for people who have hot water heaters in their bathrooms, we would advise them to keep at a lowest temperature. So in case there is a seizure, you won't get scalded by hot water. And faucets which may turn hot and heat up and injure the person, we would advise them to put the covers on the faucet handles. Okay, the kitchen is also an area which is prone to accidents should a person with epilepsy develop a fit during cooking, for example. So some of the practical advice we do give them is get a microwave oven or get an induction stove cooker, which is much safer than an open fire. Use a cart to carry the hot food so that you don't drop it and burn yourself. Use unbreakable dishes. So should a seizure happen and dishes are dropped, it does not cut the person with epilepsy. No electric knives, and try as much as possible to use cordless kettle and cordless iron. Outside the home, we would advise them not to climb ladders or roofs. So if there's any leaking roofs or anything that needs any repairs or damage, please call the proper person to come and help fix that, not climb it up yourself. The living room can also be an accident-prone area of the house. So as much as possible, put soft carpeting or a wooden floor, because in cases of falls, wooden floors and carpets tend to give a buffer and cause a bit less injury than cement or tiled floors. Avoid any trailing wires, any loose rugs. Try to keep the floor as clutter-free as possible. And in places with if you're living on a high floor, for example, fit safety glass in the windows and the doors to prevent injuries. What about the bedroom? Again, the same kind of advice applies. Have a low bed rather than a high one. Have your room carpeted. Avoid any clutter. Avoid any loose rugs. Avoid any wires running all over the place. Finally, what about in the garden? A lot of us love to have gardens, and especially in this COVID times, people have taken up gardening as a hobby. So anybody with epilepsy can also do that if they want to, but we would advise them to have certain safeguards in place so that they minimize injuries. So it's always better to have grass than concrete, because when you have a seizure and you fall on grass, it helps to buffer and prevent less injuries compared to concrete or gravel. And if they like to use all this, power gadgets, for example, electrical seizures and so on, have a power breaker. So should a seizure happen, the gadget would just stop functioning, and that prevents injuries. So I think this is the last of my slides. So I hope I have managed to cover very briefly, though, the several different aspects that somebody with epilepsy would be facing in their day-to-day life. Small things like how do you navigate your life in your own kitchen and bathroom, and bigger things such as marriage and occupation and driving and so on. And I hope this has given some idea of what they face so that we are better able to understand them and better able to help with destigmatizing the condition and the people that are suffering from it. Thank you so much for listening. I would welcome any questions after this.
Thank you, Doctor, for the useful information. So now we have a quiz session. May I now invite Dr. Sumita Murugesu from Hospital Tunku Azizah, Kuala Lumpur to start the session. Doctor, you may continue.
Hi, very good morning. First of all, thank you very much, organizers and Dr. Ahmad, for inviting me. So I will be your quiz master this morning. We're going to play a game using a Kahoot app. I think most of you are aware of the Kahoot app. But I would like to, first of all, apologize because of some limitations. We are only able to accept 50 participants, right? So you need to, I'll show you how to log in and all that. But I need you to have your mobile phones next to you because the questions will be coming out on the laptop or your computer, but you would be keying in your answers through your phone, okay? To the speakers and the organizers, please don't get excited and log in. You're not allowed to play. These are only for the participants, okay? All right. I'm going to share my screen now. Are you able to see my screen? All right. I get a yes from someone. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. So get ready. Bring out your handphones. Can you kindly log on to www.kahoot.it? The quicker you do it, you get to be in the game. There's only limited place, 50 people. So key in the PIN number 82812222. All right, 4 so far. Right, 11 to lead. Okay, hurry up. You don't get your certificates if you don't play the game. Okay, we've got 25 more places. Hurry up. All right. 20, 19, 18, 17. Hurry up, hurry up. Okay, 10 more places, 10 more slots. Okay, 42 participants, seven more places. We've got 7 more places. Okay. I'm going to give you a few more seconds or minutes. We're going to get started. We've got 6 more places, 44 participants on board. We need another 6. All right. 4 more places, www.kahoot.it, key in the PIN number and you get to join us. Some of you are logging in and logging out. Okay,
Maybe
hurry up.
they want to try to change the name, fancy name.
Ah, fancy name. Okay, okay. One more place. Come on, who is 49 on board? Just one more, last participant. Okay, so all right, fine, great. Shimazian. Okay, all right, great. We've got 50. For those of you who didn't manage to get in the game or participate, please don't feel disheartened. You can. Oh, I think we've got. Wow, I'm actually able to get 51. I'm surprised. Okay. Let me speak for a while. So for those of you who are not able to join the game, don't be disheartened. We also still hope you would try to answer the questions on your own. I don't think I can wait any longer, so I'm going to start. Remember that the questions will flash on your laptop and the answer key would come onto your phone and you're supposed to key in the answers. And you get the highest points are awarded not just to those who answer correctly, you have to answer quickly. Okay, and you only have 20 seconds to 30 seconds for each question. Sometimes there are some clues amongst the questions itself, so you got to pay attention. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start the quiz. Right. Happy school quiz. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Ready. First question. One occupation that is not allowed for patients with epilepsy. That was in Dr. Raihana's talk. Teacher, engineer, pilot, or farmer. Quickly answer. You've got 13 seconds. There are clues in the screen if you get it. All right. Fantastic. 48 have answered. 3, 2, and 1. Done. Okay, and the answer is pilot. 40 of you got it correct. 8 of you said teachers. Right? No. So if you paid attention to Dr. Raihana's last talk, obviously you don't want to go on a plane with a pilot with epilepsy. You would definitely crash, and let's not go there. Yeah. So okay. Next. Okay, so this is the scoreboard. Farina, congratulations, you're leading right now. Let's see if we can take over Farina's place. So next. The common type of epilepsy in adolescent or teenagers include the following except absence epilepsy, epilepsy after a stroke, epilepsy with generalized tonic-clonic seizures, or myoclonic epilepsy. So common type of epilepsy in adolescent, yeah? A little bit, maybe a little bit harder, but you can try, no problems. 7 seconds to go. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think most of you answered. And the answer is actually epilepsy after a stroke. So absence epilepsy, epilepsy with generalized tonic-clonic seizures, and myoclonic epilepsy are very common in children and adolescents. Epilepsy after stroke is usually an adult sort of a disease. So the answer is that. So let's see who's at the top position. Farina, you had slipped down, and Saralina, you've taken over her place. Fantastic. Let's move on to the third question. True or false? You only have 20 seconds. It is important to time the duration of seizure. It is important to time the duration of seizure. True or false? Just click true or false. All right. 8, 7, you've got 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. And the answer is 50 of you got it right. Yeah, it's true. It's important for us, the clinicians, to know how long the seizures lasted. So you, of course, when the seizures occur, most of us panic, but at your best, try to get a rough idea of how long the seizures started or when it started. Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next. Let's see the scoreboard once again. Now, Fontip has taken over Saralina's place, and let's go on to the next question. True or false again? After a seizure, the child should be put in a recovery position. True or false? This is pretty easy. There's some clues somewhere around if you pay attention. Right, 8, 7, 6. Come on, I think everybody has answered. Okay, and the answer is true, yeah? Yes, and it's very important. So it's important to put a child in a recovery position. Usually we say either left lateral or right lateral. That's because you want to ease the breathing of the child. You don't want secretions to fall back and things like that. Yeah. So you must put a patient in a recovery position. So let's look at the scoreboard. Fontip, you're still leading very, very good. Let's move on. Okay, Anne is 7 years old with epilepsy. Recently, she seems withdrawn, irritable, and short-tempered. How can you, as teachers, help her? So Dr. Karen has, in her last few slides, if Anne is withdrawn, irritable, and has short temper, it means she's depressed. How do you help her as teachers? Do you punish her? Do you ask her friends to leave her alone? Or do you inform her parents so that she can get appropriate help? So which is the correct answer? All right, I think most of you have answered. Excellent. Correct answer is yes, you inform her parents so that they can get her evaluated and we can give her the necessary help. You never punish a child, for having these problems. It is not her fault. It's an association with the underlying epilepsy, and asking her friends to leave her alone only makes things worse. Yeah, so never do that. Let's look at the scoreboard. Wow, Fontip, you are holding the fort. Very good. Let's move on to the next question. Now choose which statement is true. True, yeah? So women with epilepsy are infertile and cannot get pregnant. People with epilepsy have lower IQ than others. And all epilepsy patients can pass on their disease to their children. And people with epilepsy can drive if they are seizure-free for at least 1 year on the medication. Right, so which is the true statement? Just one answer. Okay, lots of you not answering. Hurry up, 1 second and you're done. Okay, must be a little bit tough. The answer is people with epilepsy can drive if they are seizure-free for at least 1 year on medication. I think the rest, Dr. Sharini had covered. Women with epilepsy, they are not infertile and they can get pregnant. And it's not necessary that if a parent has epilepsy and he's going to pass it to his child is a wrong understanding. And once again, people with epilepsy do not have a lower IQ compared to others. That's a wrong, understanding. Yeah. So the answer is the one in green. Only 26 of you got it right. Let's see who's. Okay, Saralina, you've got back your throne. Let's move on to the next question. True or false? You should hold a child down tightly during a seizure. Hold a child down during a seizure. True or false? You should. Read the question properly. You've got 13 seconds. Three, two, one. The answer is false, yeah. You do not hold a child down tightly during a seizure. You can hold them gently. You don't want to cause unnecessary injuries to the child, okay? So let's see, Sarah Lina, let's see if you are still holding the fort. Yes, you are. Very good. Let's move on to the next question. Now, leisure or hobbies which are low risk, low and moderate risk, I would say, okay, include these activities except. So which activity is not a low or moderate risk activity? Parachuting, football, badminton, or horse riding? Which is the correct answer? Come on, it's easy and time's up. Okay, very good, 29. I think 10 of you answered badminton, no. I think that the Raihana in her talk had said that badminton comes under low risk. Football is also low risk, and you would see that I added on low and moderate. That's because horse riding is actually a moderate risk activity. So you can still ride a horse if you have proper, your strap and your stirrups and things like that. Yeah, so no parachuting, no way. Okay, let's see who's holding the fort. So yes, Saralina, fantastic. 3 in a row, you're still at the top. Let's move on to the next question. True or false? If you have a family history of epilepsy, you are likely to have it too. True or false? If you have a family history of epilepsy, you are very likely to have it too. Yikes. I think a lot of speakers had touched on this topic. And it's a common misunderstanding as well. I gave away the answer, I think. The answer is false, yeah, it's not necessary. Some epilepsy have a predilection to run in families, but you do not necessarily, it does not mean that if your parent has epilepsy, you're definitely gonna have it, yeah? So let's see now, who's still at the top? All right, Saralina, let's move on. Next, true or false again? Jerking movement can be absent during a seizure. True or false? Jerking movement can be absent during a seizure. What do you think? I think Dr. Hu had spoken about it a little bit as well. Right. The answer is true. Very good. It's true, yeah? So in example, if you have absence seizure, you may not necessarily have a jerking component in your seizure, yeah? So that's the correct answer. Let's move on to see. Whoa, nobody's going to beat Saralina. Come on, the rest of you. Next, let's move on to the next question. True or false? Epilepsy is contagious. Whoa, is that true? Epilepsy is contagious. In bahasa Melayu, epilepsi boleh merebak. That's scary. Right, let's see. What's the true answer? 5, 4. All of you have answered. Fantastic. 3, 2, 1. And the answer is false. Oh no, if epilepsy is contagious, I think all the speakers will be having epilepsy by now. No, epilepsy is not contagious. It's not an infectious disease. Let's wash these thoughts out of our heads, at least from now, yeah? Right, let's see who's at the top. All right, Ili has come up to second place, and Amira, you're at third place. Saralina, congratulations, still at the top. Let's move on to the next question. True or false? During a seizure, you should open the child's mouth. Think of this carefully. If you listen to the talk, is this true? During a seizure, you should open the child's mouth. True or false? Come on, only 43 have answered. You've got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the answer is false. You never try to open the child's mouth. You never try to insert anything. You never try to put anything in the mouth. Yeah. Only if something is overtly sticking out, then you pull it out. Otherwise, you never try to open the child's mouth. You may get yourself injured. So never do it. Never do it. So next, let's see. So Fontip, you've come up to the third place. And let's move on to the next question. True or false? During a seizure, a person could swallow or choke on his tongue. Is it true or false? During a seizure, a person could swallow or choke on his tongue. True or false? Think hard, think carefully. Come on, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And the answer is false, yeah. You never, I don't know, you never swallow or choke on your tongue. The only possibility is you probably bite on your tongue. I think it's quite impossible to swallow the tongue. I don't know how you can swallow or choke on your tongue, but yeah, you know, okay, it's false, yeah. Let's move on to the scoreboard. Okay, Saralina still at the top. The rest of you have moved up or down. Let's move on to the next question. True or false? Again, you should restrain someone having a seizure. Restrain means holding down. You should restrain someone having a seizure. True or false? Okay, I think many speakers touched on this as well. This comes during the first aid of seizures. So 3, 2, and 1. And the correct answer will be false. Correct, yeah? You should never restrain. You do not try to restrain someone having a seizure. Your aim as a first aid responder is to keep the person in a safe position. Yeah, so you never try to restrain someone. You may cause either injury to yourself or to the person. So, all right, Saralina holding the fort still. The rest of you, come on. Let's move on to the next question. What lifestyle advice should be given to students with epilepsy? Number 1, get enough regular sleep, avoid physical activity, screen time should be reduced to a maximum of 3 hours a day, and avoid going camping with friends. So I think this topic was touched on by Prof. Chung-Hee. So if you had listened to his talk, you can answer this question. It's rather easy. So what lifestyle advice should is the keyword, yeah, be given to students with epilepsy? All right, let's see. Correct. So most of you got it right. So you need to tell them they need to get enough sleep, because we know if you have inadequate sleep, you can exacerbate or trigger seizures. You never tell a student that he should avoid physical activity. A child or a student should be able to continue his usual physical activity as usual, except for those that are high risk. And the screen time needs to be reduced to, it's not 3 hours. The rule is approximately 2 hours a day. And again, you don't avoid a child from going on with camping activities with friends as long as they are safe and there is supervision. Okay? All right. So let's move on to let's see. Okay, great, Saralina. Are you sure you didn't get my questions from somewhere? You seem to be getting everything right. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, the following is important to support the diagnosis of epilepsy, except. So the following is important to support, remember the word support, the diagnosis of epilepsy, except a brain MRI, a collateral history from someone who witnessed the seizure, ECG or electrocardiography, those leads that you put on your heart, your chest, or EEG, the leads that you put on your head, and the answer is correct, ECG. Now, the most important thing is, we always say, is a history from a witness, somebody who had witnessed the seizure. It is the most important thing, and it's going to be you. So that's very important. EEG is important because it gives us an idea of what type of epilepsy syndrome is this, or is this even epilepsy? And MRI brain helps us to, decipher what is the possible structural etiology. ECG is electrocardiography. We probably use it in patients who come in with syncopal attacks. So it's only useful for patients with heart rhythm abnormalities. Yeah, so that's the answer. And let's see. Oh no, Saralina, you had dropped down to the 3rd place. Welcome, Zol. You're leading the team right now. Let's move on to the next question. So which of the following is least, that means not helpful, in supporting the student with epilepsy in school? Not allowing them from attending outdoor activity, providing them ongoing support, care, manage both physical and mental health, and providing appropriate first aid seizure medication during a seizure. So which is not helpful in supporting a student with epilepsy in school? All right, so yeah, we've got 7 seconds to go. Let's see how well you've done. Okay, and excellent. The answer is you do not restrain or refrain a student from attending outdoor activities as long as they are safe, they've got safety equipment, and they've got supervision. The other two answers are correct. Yeah. So let's move to see what happened. Zul, you're still holding on to the top of the podium. And let's move on to the next question. These are causes of seizure except. These are causes of seizure except stroke, abnormal development of the brain, brain infection or meningitis, and evil spirit. Ooh. Okay, so which is not the cause of seizure? Easy, evil spirits. I think Dr. Sharini probably had spoken about this yesterday. Yeah, so all the others, stroke, brain infection, meningitis, and abnormal development of the brain, they all cause seizures. Okay, all right, let's move on. Zol, you're still at the top. Very good. Let's move on to the next question. Which is the wrong statement? Wrong statement, yeah? Epilepsy is a highly stigmatized disease. Epilepsy is a form of mental illness. Depression is common in people with epilepsy, and people with epilepsy can have normal children. So which is the wrong statement? All right, correct. So the answer is epilepsy. I asked for the wrong statement. Epilepsy is not a mental illness. Epilepsy is a neurological illness, yeah? The rest of the stems are actually correct. Okay, so let's see if Zol is still holding the fort. Nope, Saralina, you've taken back your place. Whoa, right now, this is your last question, everybody. Okay, what is the color associated with World Epilepsy Day? Oh, pink, orange, purple, or black? This is easy, come on. You've got 10 seconds. I think everybody has answered. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The color associated with World Epilepsy Day is the color of my blouse is purple. Okay, let's see. Okay, now let's see who is at third place. Is Ili. Congratulations, Ili. At second place is Zol. Fantastic, Zol. And at first place, Sarah. I think it's Saralina. Congratulations, everybody. Well done. Well done. And at fourth and fifth place, you have Lynn and Shuhaira. So thank you very much for joining me. I hope you had fun, yeah? So I'm going to unshare my screen.
Okay, thank you, Doctor, for the quiz session. So now, I will invite Dr. Ahmad Ritauddin Mohamad, Pediatric Neurologist Consultant from Hospital Tunku Azizah, Kuala Lumpur, to give the lecture session. He will talk on the topic supporting children with epilepsy. Dr. Ahmad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you, Doctor.
Yes.
Excellent. My video might be a little bit funny because I seem to have the same problem as Miss Karen just now. The video on the laptop doesn't work, so I have to use a second video from my handphone. And I'm actually in my car, so I have to use this background. Anyway, first of all, thank you very much to all the speakers. Thank you, Sumi, for a fantastic quiz. I would not have won the quiz if I had entered, I think. What I hope to do for the next few minutes is to try and summarize some of the key points that have been raised by the previous speakers. All of them have spoken very well. It's probably a lot for you to remember and to understand, but that's okay. And repetition helps. And I hope some of the points I will try and touch on again. But before I start the talk, I think there was a question yesterday from one of the participants, I think by Mr. Anwar. He was asking about cerebral palsy and epilepsy. So cerebral palsy is a condition that we describe in children who have problems with their movements or their posture, and their motor abilities. And usually cerebral palsy is due to an injury to the brain at an early age. It may be an injury right, in the womb, or that occurred after birth. Now, depending on what type of injury that patient has, he or she may have epilepsy. Right. So the answer to your question is yes, there is a slightly increased risk of epilepsy and seizures in children with cerebral palsy. But it doesn't mean that all children with cerebral palsy have epilepsy. All right. So I hope that answers the question. I'm starting to share my slide now, and I hope you can see it. So I just want to again highlight some of the points that have been raised by the previous speakers. The first being, epilepsy is a common condition. We saw some statistics that from shows, it's common in Malaysia, it's common in Indonesia, it's common in Philippines, it's common in Thailand, it's common everywhere in the world. There's no one country without, children and adults with epilepsy. And it affects all ages. It affects babies and children and teenagers and adults. So if you haven't come across someone that you know personally with epilepsy, you will at some point in your life. So it's important to be aware and to have some knowledge about this condition. However, it's not everything that you see. Not everyone who falls or have some jerking are having a seizure. I hope you won't all go back to your school and start to diagnose everyone with epilepsy, because there are many things that can look like seizures but are not. Fainting is a good example. Children who stand in the assembly, especially in the hot sun, they might faint. They don't necessarily have seizures. Children in classroom may have some jerks here and there. They might be having motor tics. So even though epilepsy is common, all these other mimics such as fainting and motor tics are even more common than seizures. So please don't diagnose everyone with epilepsy. Epilepsy is just another illness. There's nothing mysterious about epilepsy. We heard a wonderful talk by Dr. Sharini yesterday about how, epilepsy was viewed in the past, and that probably played a big role in giving this big stigma to epilepsy. It's just another illness. It's like, if you look at patients with a heart problem, with a heart attack, do you see it as a mysterious disease? No, it's just a condition where they have a problem with their heart vessel, for example. If you look at children with asthma, do you see it as a mysterious disease? No, it's just they just have sensitive lungs and sensitive airways, and they tend to wheeze whenever they have some triggers. Similarly, children with epilepsy just have this tendency to have seizures for whatever reason. It might be genetic reasons. It might be that they have some problems with their brain structure, but it's nothing mysterious. If you do an EEG, which is looking at the electrical activity in the brain, you'll see brainwave abnormalities most of the time in children and in adults as well. If you do a brain scan, sometimes you see changes to explain the seizures. If you do some genetic testing, sometimes you will find an explanation for the seizures. So there's nothing mysterious about epilepsy. It is a physical disease affecting the brain. Okay. I hope over the past few lectures you have learned about some of the seizure types. Don't worry, you're not expected to remember all the many different seizure types that have been shown. Just remember, seizures are not just generalized tonic-clonic. It's not just whole body shaking and mouth frothing. There are many different types. If you want to be a bit more knowledgeable, you can try and think about seizures as being either something starting from one part of the brain, known as a focal seizure, or involving both sides of the brain. involving also known as a generalized seizure. But it doesn't matter. You don't even need to use the term focal seizure or generalized seizure. What's important is for you to try and describe as best as you can, because it would be helpful, especially to doctors when we come to assess these children, to try and decide what sort of investigation they need, what sort of treatment they might benefit from, when we know what the seizures look like. So just use normal terms, stiffening and jerking, falling. That's perfectly okay. But try and be as detailed as possible. It's also important to describe what happens just before the seizures, not just describing the seizures, because the scenarios and the situations where these episodes occur will help us to decide, what kind of seizure it is, whether it is a seizure in the first place or not. We heard about the treatment of epilepsy in children and also in adults. I think the key point is, most of the time, seizures can be controlled well. So if you have somebody, a child in your classroom or anyone that you know who seemingly have poorly controlled seizures, the first thing to do would be to get him properly assessed. It might be that what you're seeing are not seizures. It might be that he's not on proper medication. It might be that he's not taking his medication as prescribed by his doctors, right? There will be a small proportion of children and adults with difficult to control seizures. That's unavoidable. They would need additional specialist help. Some of them will need surgery. Some of them will need special diets. And despite of all what we try to do, unfortunately, some patients may still be quite challenging to treat. But at the very least, they should at least get to the right people, get to the right specialists, and be properly assessed. It's important, I hope, that if you got from this course, to remember that seizures themselves are rarely life-threatening, right? You don't simply die from your seizures, especially if your seizures are infrequent. Of course, there is this small risk of SUDEP, also known as sudden unexpected death in patients with epilepsy, but that risk is extremely small. For the vast majority of patients, seizures are not life-threatening. However, they can cause injuries. So it's important for you to know and to advise your school children about the safety measures that we've heard. Dr. Rahana touched on it. Prof. Chungi have also talked about what are the things, what are the steps that you need to take to make sure that your children are safe. I hope everyone will have just at least a basic knowledge of what your airway, breathing, and circulation. That applies not just for epilepsy, but for any medical emergencies. Putting patients or whoever the victim is in the recovery position, loosening tight clothes, making sure they're in a safe place, and all. These are just basic measures that you can do. You don't need to know very advanced medical treatment when dealing with children who may have seizures in school. So also important to remember, when you have somebody in school with epilepsy, that the seizures may not just be the only problem. And we've heard beautifully how Ms. Karen just now explained about the other problems that these children may have. And sometimes these problems are even more problem for the children and for the families. So they may have issues with behavior. They may have issues with learning, which is a big thing. They may have symptoms of anxiety and depression, and all these things need to be addressed and looked into. Finally, I hope it's clear that if we can at least have better knowledge of all the problems that these children may have, and we have some way or some knowledge of how to help them and treat them, and these children may do much better in school and also later on in their life. So what can you do as teachers? I think the most important thing will be to know your students, right? If you've got someone, if the parents have already told you that my child has epilepsy, maybe try and find out a little bit more. What type of epilepsy it is? Maybe is he on medication? What type of medication he's taking? Is he seeing his doctors regularly? Are there anything special about his seizures that you need to know? What to do in an emergency and all that. As we heard from Prof. Fong, teachers are not allowed to give emergency medicines, but at least there are certain other things that you can do. If there's a child without a known diagnosis of epilepsy, but you are worried, you're concerned, there's this child who keeps having episodes of blank stares in the classroom. Perhaps you may want to speak to the parents and encourage them to get a proper assessment. If somebody with or without epilepsy, seemingly not doing well at school, not finishing work and all that, you may want to find out what's going on. Some children with epilepsy may have some learning difficulties. They may be a bit more slow in finishing their school. You may need to give them extra time and things like that. So it's important to try and identify those in need of help. It'd be good to know what to do during and after a seizure. As I mentioned just now, the communication between the teachers and the carers will be important. In some schools, in some Western countries, they have this written epilepsy action plan. So this will be usually written by the specialist nurse or by the doctor, and describing what are the seizure types, what are the warning signs, what to do when a child has a seizure. But if you don't have that, there's still things that you can do. You can still discuss with the family. It's not you don't need always to call families to come and pick their children up after a seizure. If the seizure is a mild seizure and the child recovers fully after that. It would be important though to perhaps keep a diary for each child, when the seizure happened, what triggered it, what did you do, how quickly did he recover. All these things will be helpful, not just for your records, but also for the families and for the doctors who are treating children. I hope all of you, having attended this course, will be armed with new knowledge and enthusiasm, and will be spreading this new knowledge of that you've got to other teachers. We can only, there's only what, 80 of you in this course, and how many hundreds of thousands of teachers are there in Malaysia and in Thailand and all the other different countries. Please spread the awareness. There's nothing to there's nothing to be too worried about with children who have epilepsy in school. Try and dispel the stigma that's attached to the disease, and hopefully you'll become, as Prof. Dato' Raymond said, the catalyst to increase the awareness and remove all the stigma, in particular in school, but also in the community in general. And be advocates for your students. Some of your students there may sometimes be situations where there are certain regulations that will not allow students to join this, do this. Perhaps when there are requests for certain things, you can't do it because of this rule or that rule. But please think about your students first. If it can't be done, find ways to try and help your students. You should be advocates for your students, especially those with special needs, like children with epilepsy. There's plenty of resources available nowadays in Malaysia. I don't know what it's like in your respective countries, but in Malaysia we have organizations like the Persatuan Epilepsi Malaysia. Dr. Sherini, who spoke yesterday, is the president of that. You know, they've got Facebook, they've got websites, and there's lots of information in there. And it's always good to you know, try and explore some of these resources. There's also apps. So this one example. This was developed by Prof. Tan Hui Jan, a neurologist in UKM. So you can download it. That is on Apple or Android. And there's plenty of things in there. There's even the lectures from last year's SEAMEO SEN program on epilepsy on that. So it's worth checking it out. If you wanted something from overseas, I found this Epilepsy Action UK website and resources extremely useful. They've even got online training, free online training sessions for epilepsy, for schools, for nurses. You know, so it's worth checking it out. There may be some differences in some of the rules and regulations and all that, but certainly still worth exploring. So I think I won't give you more and more lectures. I think you've had more than enough information from all the excellent speakers. But I just want to take this last slide to again thank all the speakers, the organizers. Thank Dr. Hanani for facilitating this excellent program. I hope we will continue to have, you know, these at least yearly programs with SEAMEO SEN. And as for all the participants, I hope you will continue to, you know, try and increase your knowledge and from now on be advocates for your children with epilepsy. And with that, I think I'd like to end my talk. Thank you.